in Vietnam, the war wasn't only fought above ground. Beneath the rice fields and villages, another world existed, a hidden network stretching hundreds of miles. They called it the Tunnels of Cu Chi. The Cu Chi tunnels began during the war against the French. Villagers dug them by hand, narrow passages just wide enough for one person to crawl. When the United States entered the war, the network expanded. By the mid-1960s, it ran for more than 120 miles under southern Vietnam. The tunnels were more than hiding places. They were cities underground with kitchens, hospitals, weapon factories, and living quarters. Some went 3 levels deep. Air shafts disguised as termite mounds vented the smoke from cooking fires. Doors were trapped with grenades or sharpened bamboo stakes. Bombing only made the tunnels stronger. Every crater became another entrance. American engineers tried to seal them with explosives, bulldozers, and poison gas. Nothing worked. The Viet Cong would wait until the Americans left, then dig them open again. Commanders realized there was only one option left: go in by hand. The men who volunteered for tunnel duty came from infantry units. They were usually short and wiry, small enough to fit through the entrances. They carried .45 caliber pistols, bayonets, flashlights, and sometimes a revolver loaded with low-noise rounds. Before entering, they stripped off gear to move quietly. Inside, there was no room to turn around. The air was thick and stale, and sometimes laced with gas or smoke. Rats, snakes, and centipedes lived inside. Many of the tunnels were booby-trapped: tripwires, grenades, punji pits, or doors that triggered explosions. The first rule was silence. A single sound could bring a hidden defender to fire blindly down the tunnel. Most missions began the same way: a small entrance, one man going in head first, the rest waiting in the sun, counting the seconds. They called it going down the throat. If he didn't come back in 10 minutes, they sent another. Every meter was a gamble. Sometimes the flashlight showed nothing but dirt walls. Sometimes it caught a face just a few feet away. It was war at zero distance. No uniforms, no formation, no cover. Once inside, the tunnel rats' world shrank to the size of a coffin. They moved by touch, inch by inch. The sound of breathing echoed off the clay walls. In some tunnels there were rooms with ammunition or medical supplies. In others, sleeping quarters, still warm from the men who had just escaped deeper underground. Occasionally, they found entire command centers: radios, maps, food stores, everything an army needed to fight a long war. All of it under the ground. Americans thought they controlled. The most dangerous encounters happened when the tunnel split. A wrong turn could lead directly into an ambush. Many Viet Cong soldiers waited in silence, sometimes for hours, knowing someone would eventually come. It was a duel in the dark, 1 second of movement deciding who lived. When they fired their pistols, the blast nearly deafened them. The flash burned their eyes. They carried extra magazines, but reloading in the dark was almost impossible. If a shot didn't kill, it gave away position instantly. For every mission, there was no guarantee of escape. Most tunnel rats went in, knowing that any turn could be their last. The work of the tunnel rats began to pay off. They brought back maps, documents, and weapons that revealed how organized the underground network really was. Entire operations, such as the Tet Offensive, were planned and coordinated from these tunnels. Specialized units formed just for this task. American and Australian engineers learned to detect tunnel entrances by the way the ground felt underfoot. They developed listening devices, dogs, and gas detection kits, but in the end it was still the same story. Someone had to go in. Many tunnel rats completed dozens of missions. They earned no special medals. Most didn't even wear rank insignia. It made them targets. The work was silent, secret, and personal. When they emerged covered in sweat and red dust, they rarely spoke about what happened below. The Viet Cong respected them. Captured diaries described them as small men who fight like demons. By 1970, American forces had mapped most of the Cu Chi network, but the tunnels were never completely destroyed. Even after the last U.S. troops left, parts of that underground world remained. The tunnel rats represented a kind of warfare unseen before Vietnam. It wasn't fought with machines or long-range weapons. It was fought with hands, flashlights, and nerve. Their courage was personal, silent, and claustrophobic. Every mission demanded absolute calm in conditions that would break most men. Today, the tunnels of Cu Chi are preserved as a historical site. Visitors walk through widened passages and crouch for photographs. The real tunnels, or the ones the rats crawled through, were smaller, darker, and alive with fear. When the war finally ended, the tunnels fell quiet. No footsteps, no whispers, no breath echoing against the clay walls, just earth, heavy, damp, and still. The men who had once gone down those tunnels returned home to a world that would never understand what they had seen beneath it. There were no parades for the tunnel rats, no medals pinned in front of cameras, only quiet recognition from the few who knew what it took to crawl into the dark, alone, and come back alive. For many of them, the war never really ended. They woke up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, feeling the walls close in again. Some couldn't stand to be in elevators or crowded rooms. The smell of wet dirt or diesel could bring the memories back in an instant. One veteran said it best. I left Vietnam in 1970, but part of me never made it out of the tunnels. The tunnels themselves became part of history. Tourists walk through them now, widened, sanitized, turned into exhibits. People take photographs where men once crawled for their lives. But the real tunnels, the ones the rats fought in, were different. They were narrow, suffocating, alive with fear. And every inch of them carries the memory of men who faced that fear head on. Time erases many things, but not courage. Not the kind that doesn't ask for recognition or headlines or reward, only the chance to survive and bring someone else home. For the tunnel rats, courage wasn't loud, it wasn't cinematic, it was measured in heartbeats and breaths taken in silence. They were soldiers who fought where the light could not reach. They were volunteers who entered the mouth of hell, not because they wanted to, but because someone had to. And in that choice, quiet, unrecorded, unseen, they embodied something rare. The kind of bravery that doesn't fade when the war is over. When you stand in Cu Chi today, you can still feel it. the weight of the ground beneath your feet. Somewhere below lies a story that will never be fully told, not because it was forgotten, but because it was lived in darkness by men who never asked to be remembered. Their story doesn't end with the war. It ends in silence, in the kind of silence only they could understand. When the guns fell silent, the tunnels remained. They ran like veins under the scarred ground, a buried anatomy of a war that refused to fade. For years, farmers avoided the fields around Cu Chi. The soil was poisoned by unexploded ordnance, and the ground itself was hollow. Every step could collapse into history. In the decades that followed, the Vietnamese government began to restore parts of the network. By the late 1980s, sections were open to visitors. Guides, many of them former Viet Cong, led tourists through widened tunnels showing how they had cooked, slept, and fought beneath the earth. They laughed softly as they watched Westerners crawl through the replicas, sweating and gasping after a few meters. It was strange to see something once meant for war become a tourist attraction. But even now, deep within the old soil, there are sections no one enters. Collapsed chambers that still hold uniforms, weapons, and bones. The Vietnamese call them quiet tunnels, graves without markers sealed by time. Each year, new artifacts are found. A rusted helmet, a flashlight with foreign writing, sometimes fragments of an M1911 pistol, the kind carried by American tunnel rats. For the Vietnamese, the tunnels are a source of pride, a story of endurance and ingenuity. For Americans and Australians, they remain a story of courage in the unknown. Two sides of the same labyrinth, both haunted by the echo of footsteps in the dark. Today, the Cu Chi tunnels are a museum, complete with souvenir stands and shooting ranges. You can fire an AK-47 for a few dollars. You can buy postcards showing soldiers smiling under the jungle canopy. But walk a little farther into the woods, away from the crowd, and the silence returns. The forest hums, and under your feet, the past still breathes. For the tunnel rats who survived, the war never truly ended. When they came home, there were no parades. They didn't talk about what they had done because nobody wanted to hear about it. People understood the war in numbers and maps, not in the sound of dirt shifting under your knees or the weight of the dark pressing down. Some returned to construction work or law enforcement, drawn again to confined spaces. Some couldn't sleep in rooms without windows. A few never entered another basement for the rest of their lives. Decades later, as veterans aged, a strange thing happened. Some returned to Vietnam, not as soldiers, but as visitors. They walked the trails they once patrolled, met locals who had fought on the other side, and stood before the tunnels that had nearly swallowed them whole. Many expected resentment. Instead, they found quiet understanding. At Cu Chi, some of the former Viet Cong guides shake hands with American veterans and call them brother. They know what it meant to fight underground, Bruce, that it wasn't about sides, but survival. Two soldiers, separated by language, united by the same fear and the same courage. One veteran wrote after his visit, "It felt like the earth had forgiven us. Maybe it never blamed us in the first place. Time had turned enemies into mirrors. Each saw in the other a reflection of what war demands." and what it steals. The tunnel. Rats' courage never made headlines. There were no medals for crawling through the dark. But their bravery lives in every soldier who has ever faced the unknown, and every person who's ever walked into fear for the sake of someone else. Today, a few of them still gather once a year, a small group, gray-haired and quiet. They talk less about war and more about life after it. They share coffee, photographs, and silence. And when one of them passes, the others say the same words, "He's gone back into the tunnel." Because for them, the tunnels were never just a place. They were a test of nerve, of humanity, of what it means to stand against the dark. And in that test, they prove something eternal. That courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward anyway, one breath at a time.